All right, good morning, everybody. We're going to be working on page 68 today, but I have to use a section of page 67 in order to solve the problems on page 68. We are looking at different weights of different fruits, and we are using those weights on the place value chart on 68. So that's why I have a couple different pages here so that we can look at both of them in order to solve for each problem. So let's get into it. So we're expressing the mass of each item on the place value chart here. And we're looking at the avocado. And the avocado is 0 and 2/10. So I'm going to put 0 and 2/10. The apple, I'm going to put red for apple. Oh, I should have done green. I'm going to do green for the avocado because that makes sense. Okay, so 0 and 2/10, 0 and 2/10. I need a darker green. Boom, there we go. Awesome. Now let's do red for the apple. The apple is 0 and 12/100ths. So I'm going to do 0 and 12/100ths. The banana is, so yellow for banana, is 0 and 6/10ths. So but the banana is 0 and 6/10ths. And then my grapes, oh, purple, yay. The grapes are 0 and 61/100ths. So I'm going to put 0 and 61/100ths. Now this is probably the coolest thing, is that we are trying to see with these weights which one is heavier than or lighter than in our statements below. So when we look at the avocado, is the avocado heavier than the apple, or is it lighter than the apple? And we can look on our place value chart here that the avocado and the apple, the avocado is 1/10 heavier. So if you look here, it is 1/10 heavier than the apple. So I would say the avocado is heavier than the apple. And oh, I gotta put heavier than. Man, that's really tight to fit. So heavier and then. Cool. And then the bunch of bananas is it lighter than or heavier than the bunch of grapes? So let's look at the bananas. Oh, this is an interesting one. So my bananas are 0 and 6/10ths, and the grapes are 0 and 6/10ths and 1/100ths. So the grapes are actually larger than the banana by 1/100th. That's pretty cool. So the bunch of bananas is lighter than the bunch of grapes by 1/100th. Cool. All right. So moving on, we're going to be focusing on the bottom page here, where we have cylinders that have different volumes, and we are focusing on placing those volumes in our place value chart. Same thing we did above, so you understand the place value chart when it comes to ones, tenths, and hundredths. So let's work with A here. We have 0 and 6 tenths. So 0 and 6 tenths. Let's work with B here. We have 0 and 3 tenths. Let's work with C. We have 0 and 9 tenths. Let's work with D. We have 0 and 9 D7 hundredths. Let's work with E. We have 0 and 19 hundredths. And let's finally do blue. We have 0 and 48 hundredths. Perfect. Now, the last thing we have to do is we have to compare these values, these volumes, in greater than, less than, or equal to. So we are going to look at each one. You're going to tell me which one is the greater volume. So what I want you to do is I want you to look at the volumes on A, B, C, and tell me what you think. So pause the video. I really want you to see if you can understand which volume is greater, and tell me that, please. So pause the video, and I want you to check your work. So look at them carefully and check your work quickly. Okay, so our first one we're going to be dealing with is 0 and 9 tenths compared to 0 and 6 tenths. You should see right off the bat that this is much larger. This is larger by 3 tenths. 0 and 9 tenths compared to 0 and 6 tenths. Our next one we're working with is B. We are working with 0 and 48 hundredths of a liter and 0 and 6 tenths of a liter. Now, at first, you might really think that 48 hundredths is larger, because 48 is way larger than 6. But when we look at the place value chart, we need to quickly realize that that's not how it works. We have decimals here, and we have tenths and hundredths. Remember, hundredths, it's getting smaller and smaller and smaller. We're cutting it more and more and more. We have tenths here. And we actually have 2 more tenths in the 0 and 6 tenths. So 0 and 6 tenths is larger than 0 and 48 hundredths. All right, same thing for 0 and 3 hundredths compared to 0 and 19 hundredths. We need to understand that we have place value, we have the decimal, and we have tenths, and we have hundredths. You can see right off the bat that we actually have 2 more hundredths here in this 3 hundredths than we did in 3 tenths. We have 2 more tenths here than we have in 19 hundredths. So this is my larger volume. Now the coolest thing is that they want us to write the volume in order from least to greatest. So the smallest. So we are going to work with the least. So 0 and 19 hundredths. So that's marked off. Our next is going to be 0 and 3 tenths. Our next one is going to be 0 and 48 hundredths. Our next one is going to be 0 and 6 tenths. Our next one is going to be 0 and 9 tenths and 0 and 97 hundredths. Awesome. So I hope you learned something very valuable today when knowing the difference between hundredths and tenths and how it looks on the place value chart and what is larger when it comes to 0 and 3/10 and say 1900ths. We know that we have more tenths. So this lesson really gives us a good understanding of place value when it comes to tenths and hundredths. Have a great day today and good job.